Hello, everyone. You're very welcome to this episode of Queer Heritage Podcast. I'm delightfully joined by Greg R. Baird, who is a global lecturer on LGBTQ plus rights, civil rights, allyship, and community engagement. And Greg does a lot of work through storytelling, drawing on his own personal experiences. And Greg is from a little bit outside of our local remit. Today, we're going to hear from Greg is based in Chicago, Illinois. And Greg, if we go back to the start, we're interested to hear from someone outside the country at this stage, particularly the USA. So,
Oh,
but if we could just go back to the start of when you can you remember what age you were when you came out, or when you first realized that you might have been gay or different from the other boys?
that's a great question. I grew up in a small town in Michigan, so it's kind of across the small pond from Chicago, not the large pond where you're at. Um, so I grew up in a very small town, and I was a kid that was into a lot of creative arts, and um, there wasn't a lot of offering in my small town, so I made my own kind of world. I was a kid who did the puppet shows and very imaginative mind and things like that. I'm adopted, and excuse me, my brother and I are both adopted from different families, and we're both gay. And I always say my parents hit the homosexual lotto or the homo lotto. That gets a good laugh when I go out and speak. Uh, I didn't really know what was going on. I remember being attracted to some old TV series, and I'm going to date myself by the old Batman show with Adam West that we had here, and I don't know if that was in the UK at all or anything. But I always thought, well, God, they're wearing very tight outfits. They're kind of hot looking. I don't know if I said hot, but I found them attractive. And just made me some friends when I got older, but I didn't know what it was. And I was a chubby kid growing up, so I did the awful thing of comparing myself to other kids that were more slender or muscular and thinking like, oh, I wish I was like them, which is an awful thing to do, but that's
Yeah.
what I did. Um, so it probably wasn't until my teens, but right around 14 years old, that this sounds like a story you could read out of a magazine, but my parents owned a cottage in northern Michigan, and my dad and I, my best friend, and his dad went up in the winter to go snowmobiling and hang out. And when my dad and his father went to the local pub, uh, to have a few beers, we were left inside this cabin, and we had some really interesting conversations that led to something more sexual. And it literally was like it was like a new dawning. Like I never had this conversation before. My parents were very protective, and we ended up fooling around. And then about an hour later, because I was so horned up again, I said, that thing we just did, could we go back and do that again? So that continued from age 14 till I was 18 with the same person. Not all the time. It was kind of sporadic, but it was very interesting. And you were closeted and hidden, and it's just an awful way to live. And he has since, all those years later, is married with kids, and the kids are older now and everything. But it's kind of interesting. I was at a class reunion. He was in the same class as me. I went up to him, lovely Illinois cold I have here. Um, I went up to him after a few drinks at our class reunion, and all my friends were like, here in Chicago, said, "Don't say anything to him. Don't bring it up. Don't talk to him." And I was standing next to him, and I've always been that closeness with him throughout the years. And I said, "Hey, I just need to ask you a question," because I wanted to make sure he was okay all these years later. And he said, "I already know what you're going to ask me." And I said, I just need to ask you, are you okay? Like all these years, I said, I don't want you to think that I'm gay because of what we did, because there's that old thing like, oh, it was all sexual thing and that's why you're gay. It's not what it was. But I didn't want him to think that. And he says, Greg, you and I were buddies then. We were hanging out. We were very connected. We were at each other's birthdays. We cared about each other. And he goes, I have no regrets at all. And that's all that was said.
Oh,
So
is he married to a woman?
he's married to a woman. Yep, I should have said that. Divorced from a woman, married to another woman now, who actually is in the same class as me growing up. But I was happy to hear that. So I didn't really discover anything until when I think it happens to a lot of people when they go to university. And that's when I got involved very reluctantly at first with a campus, we called it a gay group at the time, in which they would bring the panel into the classrooms like a sociology or psychology class, and they bring a panel up like a talk show, and you had to go down and introduce yourself, and if you're gay, lesbian, we never even spoke of transgender or anything. It was usually gay, lesbian, bisexual.
And
Ally, ally wasn't even brought up then.
and
So,
Greg, what year was that? Do you remember the year? Just so we
yeah, I
can
do. That was 19, oh my gosh, 1988.
idiot.
Yeah. And the world has changed so much since then. And we had like a political group, LGBT group, which mostly centered around HIV/AIDS education, because that was right on the forefront. And then we had a social group. And then eventually I was in charge of the social group, probably not a shocker. And like movies and planning stuff. And we might have done a bar night on a Friday, which we all got in my car and we go to Flint, Michigan, which was about hour and a half away. And we could everybody could smoke their cigarettes and have a drink and cruise people. So like we were fancy. But yeah, so it all kind of began in college speaking, and that developed further as I went on and got older.
So that was the 80s. And did you have like a typical coming out experience where you came out to your parents or anything? Do you remember?
Oh yeah. I was out with friends before I was out with my parents, and my parents were a little bit religious, not like completely, but they had their beliefs and their belief system, which was very anti-gay. I did not know my brother was gay then, not until later on in life. So my father and mother went through a divorce, and my dad remarried. And I was up in northern Michigan, and I can't remember what it was. And I was coming out to people, and I thought, well, I'll just call my dad on the phone, maybe I'll write him a letter. And so I ended up writing him a letter, and he was in Florida. So I wrote him this long letter coming out, and I thought it was very nicely put. This is right around, oh gosh, maybe 92. Um, and I thought it was safe writing the letter than being chicken and calling him on the phone, actually hearing his voice. So I timed the letter out, and I had gone out a few days later with a friend for a meal at dinner, and came home, and the blinking light was on my phone, voicemail. And my dad had called and said, I got your letter today. And mind you, my dad was the most bigoted guy growing up. Like jokes in my house growing up against women, black and brown communities, the gay community. He owned a hardware store, and he heard all these jokes at the hardware store. And they were pretty awful back in the day, the jokes. So the message said something in the order of, I got your letter today. I read it, and there was a long pause. And he goes, nothing's changed here. Call me when you get in. So he was very accepting, but I think it had a lot to do with my stepmother. And that they had some of their own kind of things in their head. Like the funniest one that I often bring up is I was heavy set back in the day. Like I was like 270 pounds around that time. I lost a lot of weight back in 2007. But my dad and stepmother were nervous about, how out I was going to be. And my dad said, well, Sally, you ask him. That was my stepmother. And she says, well, all the gay pride parades and things, we just hope that we're not going to turn on the TV one day. And this is their image of a pride parade. And we hope we're not going to see you on a float with a bunch of drag queens and you're like in a G-string dancing. And I looked at her, and I'm a heavyset guy. And I go, trust me, you have nothing to worry about. So that kind of was unspoken after a while, but at least I was out. My mother, I came out when I was student teaching and living at her house in 1991. I had to remember, you're picking my brain, this is good. In 91. And it was coming out day, and I was hiding the fact that my mates and I were going out to a gay bar in Flint, Michigan, the Copa, which was about 45 minutes away. And I will always say, oh, we're going for a movie or we're going to go do this, and I thought there is no way that she knows about this, that we were all going to the gay bar. And I was just home one Saturday. I woke up some Saturday morning and was getting ready and she was acting strange. And then that Saturday afternoon, she was upset my father was in town, who she is divorced from, because he was settling my grandmother's estate. And she goes, oh, and don't you think I don't know where you go on a Friday night? And I lost my mind, and I thought this little voice said, now you can either tell her or remain in the closet. What are your choices? And then I'm thinking, I'm living at her house till December, till I graduate from teaching. So I finally told her I was gay. I said, you want me to tell you that I'm gay? Do you want me to tell you that I'm a homosexual? Yes, I am, and I'm proud of it. Well, you could have dropped a pin in the house. And she said, well, good. She turned around, opened up the front door of the house, the screen door, went on the front yard. I kid you not. And she raised her arms like a Vita. And she goes, my son is gay. I'm a gay son, in the front yard. And we lived next door to a Baptist minister. And across the street was the fire chief of the town. And I yelled out, will you get in this house? I said, will you get your ass in this house? I said, I don't want the whole neighborhood to know. And she goes, I thought you were proud of it. I said, yeah, but I don't want to be killed, She never became really comfortable with it. And I think a lot of it had to do with not a lot of knowledge or education. My stepfather at the time, who had been in the Army, had his own ideals about it. And to her grave, she never got it. She knew I was a good person. She knew I helped people out. She mentioned that. She knew that I had worked with a lot of kids and youth and all sorts of people. So she got it. But I think if she didn't have that influence of my stepfather and more resources in a small town, it would have been better, but it just never was. And my brother was really affected by that as well, because he came out with her to her in 90. I gotta think about this. Oh no, 2004. And my brother called me and he said, well, I came out to mom. I knew my brother was gay before that. And I said, well, that's great. Well, what did she say? And my mom said, well, Douglas, at least you didn't come out of my womb, because he's adopted, and it destroyed my brother terribly. They never spoke again after that. So a lot of times when I'm speaking now, I often will tell people and look right at the parents that are sitting in the audience, don't be like what my parents were. Be more loving and accepting. I didn't really change, other than, I wasn't the ideal that you wanted, me to have a wife and children. I could still have children, but that whole thing was in her head. It was a sin and so many other levels of that as well. So, I when I speak, I just tell people, be a good steward of your family, be a good loving person, and understand, educate yourself. Education is the key.
So you got through college then, and um, what what got you into the activism? Was it the groups in college and the people that you met there, or yeah?
Yeah, I would say college was a good start, but I was getting my degree in secondary education. I wanted to be a speech theater. I wanted to be a speech theater teacher. Um, and that was on my forefront. But then, it was always in the back of my mind, like, oh my gosh, what if my students find out that I'm gay? And I worked at summer camps, and the kids really emulated me. Some thought I was a hero at times with just, I was jovial and loving and caring and fun. And especially the summer camp I worked at in northern Michigan, I left to go work at another camp in Connecticut. The last that was from like 98 to 2006. And that was an incredible time because I was accepted there for being gay. Mind you, I'm closer to New York City and things like that. So um, it was just kind of matter of factly, which it should be. But I was really worried for many years, and all these kids I worked at in high school and things like that, like, oh my God, if they find out, they'll destroy them. And I found out later on in life, it wasn't the kids I had to worry about at all. It was the administration and the parents because they thought, oh, they would think, oh my God, this guy's gay. He's gonna, rub up against him, and oop, they're lesbian. Oop, they're gay, or something sexual with them or whatever. That's all in their head. There's all those phobias and craziness. Um, so when I was going through all of that, and then I went into higher ed and got involved being director of a lecture series, I was really sparked, and this is in 2000. Oh no, I have to back up. This is in 96. I hired Jeannie White Ginder, who was the mother of Ryan White. And I don't know if many of your viewers will know who Ryan White was, but he was a young kid in everything going on with HIV/AIDS. He was a young kid that contacted HIV. And, it was the whole idea that, well, the only people that can get HIV is intravenous drug users and gay men. And then you get this young boy that contacted from a bad blood product, and the world went crazy. Well, I hired his mother to come speak at my college, and I ended up becoming very close with her. And she's the one who really put the spark in me to say, you need to be out motivating people and encouraging people. You got a very caring soul. You got a world of storytelling. So then she hired me to come speak for the Ryan White Youth Conference on HIV/AIDS. And I said, Jeannie, I'm not an expert on HIV/AIDS whatsoever. She goes, no, you're missing my point. I want you to talk about you. I want you to talk about your story so you can educate people. And I did that for the first time. She flew me out to Chicago, incidentally. And I was at the Hotel Intercontinental and spoke at a luncheon for about 300 and some people, got a standing ovation. And it really made me think like something's going on legacy wise for me. And I did that over the years, off and on for different organizations. And then I had an agency that I worked with at my college that I booked acts through, and they were just starting their own lecture series. And they said, well, we want to represent you and see if we can get a few acts for you, a few gigs for you. And they did. And then a few years later, right around 2002, they said, well, we'd like to represent you full time, which was amazing. But you need to be near a major airport to fly in and out, which I wasn't. So I made a really big life change in moving from northern Michigan and being as they say, the big fish in the small pond to moving to Chicago and being the small fish in the big pond. Uh, and things have evolved since then. I'm no longer with that agency. I'm with two different agencies now, and then another thing, clearinghouse called Speaker Hub. And The topics have changed a lot because the world has changed. And I got involved with film editing and directing, and I did a documentary I was executive producer of a film about Matthew Shepard. And then I did my own film and editing on the hate crime that occurred at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida. So it's evolved considerably since then. And you know, don't make $1 million doing it. You know, when you're out saving the world, you make a lot of sacrifices, but I wouldn't change it for the world.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not something that you get into for the money. It's for the love of the work and
Yep.
to, yeah, to get the message out. So the film about Matthew Shepard that you worked on, was that the one with Stockard Channing?
No, no. It was a documentary film that a former student and I worked on. It was very grassroots. We went out. This is way after the Laramie Project was there, and they filmed that. Um, we went out and interviewed several people, and we didn't know where we were going to go with this film. We talked to, uh, some of the townspeople, where incidentally, some would not talk to us because they've been so inundated years later with the murder and the stigma in Laramie, Wyoming of, oh, this is the place where hate resides, and that really wasn't the case. But we did interview a lot of people. We went to the bar where Matthew was at before he went out and got killed on the fence in Laramie. We talked to some townspeople. We talked to some authorities that were there. And the film really didn't get off its feet, so to speak. I use it segments I have in the past for lecture programs that I do, but we really, I guess the director felt like we didn't have like a really a story, like original story, because it'd been on the news so much. And then a film came out later that was called Matt Shepard is a Friend of Mine, which is brilliant. And it was done by actually a friend of his and documenting her friendship with him and right up until the murder and afterwards. So she had more of a story because she was a friend of hers. I mean, I was friends with the Shepards at the time, and I had been out to Laramie before speaking. But so I just use it in that program when I talk about erasing hate. And, as the time has gone on, you're looking at 28 years later this October, we have a tendency to forget a lot of those things from our past,
Yep.
those moments in our life. So I don't get booked a lot for that program anymore. I still talk about it, even with the Pulse nightclub film that I was a director of, that I took a matter of a few years to go down and document. That's all changing now because I believe this month they are going to be doing construction work on that memorial site. Like they're leveling the bar and they're going to put up a new memorial, which should have been done several years ago. But my film documents from the time the shooting happened to where it is now. And that was in 2000. I finished that in 2018, I believe, was the last time I filmed it.
Okay. And with the Pulse nightclub, it was horrendous, that shooting, and um yeah, it couldn't have been easy. Are any of those documentaries available for the public, or do you travel with them to protect the stories? That's what we do with our documentaries. We make sure that we keep them with us because we have question and answers afterwards, and also to protect the story. So is it similar with yourself?
Of all the times I've been interviewed, you are the first person to tell me that, to ask me that, and you're absolutely correct. Um, the segments of the Shepard film I've used in some of my lecture program, and like I'm actually using some of that. Um, there is a choir group that does some singing. It's called Concerning Matthew Shepard. A lot of times it's at a church or a huge hall, and they'll put up images on the wall of Matt. And I've been asked to go in and do like a before talk or after talk. And I'm doing one of those in October, which I'm really happy about because Matt, come April 1st, would have been 50 years old.
Yeah.
So, and then the Pulse nightclub film, which is 13 minutes, it's called 2:02 a.m. I decided not to put that out like on YouTube for the sake of I want to be respectful of the people that were killed, the survivors, and also the first responders that were there. We can watch anything on YouTube, and I feel like with that film, it's so gripping and disturbing at the same time. I want to be present to answer those questions
Yeah.
from and give dialogue and just grace to it. Because people can watch on the web and click it like, oh, that was cute. But I want to be there in the audience. I want to see the reaction. I want to answer a lot of questions. And if you put it out on the web, you're not there to do that. You could answer a text message, but it's better in person for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would totally agree with that because you have to protect the stories, particularly now with AI. It would be very
Oh,
easy to take take it out of context and you can make people look like they're saying or doing anything.
yeah, absolutely.
So what was the political landscape like and the social scene? Good nightlife and social scene for yourself when you had come out
Do you mean currently or when I came out?
around your university days when you were starting to get into the activism.
Okay. You were still afraid being out. I had a boyfriend in college, and we never, held hands in public or anything until we went out to the A's Memorial Quilt out in Washington, D.C. And we were walking around looking at the panels hand in hand. And he looked at me, he like looked down, while we were holding hands. He goes, well, this is different. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, I feel like I'm 16 years old. And he goes, I've never been able to do this in public with you before. So, we didn't meet on campus. We were off in this uh, Universal Unitarian Church that provided space for us. And, you didn't bring it. I mean, people knew, I think probably you were gay here and there, but I wasn't out totally. I think in my theater department, of course, that's kind of a safe haven. But going out, there was a bar downtown called the Bird. It was, and their logo was a big pink flamingo. And it was gay on Thursday nights there. And it was a mixed crowd and it was fine. But if we really wanted to go out, we would go to, in my big car and drive an hour and a half and go to the Copa, which is in Flint, Michigan. That was fabulous. It's no longer there, but it was very tropical and great inside. And we just thought we were the shit, as I said. We just thought we were great. And it was only gay on Friday and Sunday, and then the rest of the time was all straight crowd. So, and there was other places we could drive down to where the state capitol's at, East Lansing. There was a bar down there, but you'd have to have a designated driver and all that kind of stuff. So, um,
So many similarities between our cultures, with bars only having one or two nights that were set aside
really,
for our community. Yeah.
wow,
In the beginning, it was very rare that until probably 1999, 2000 would have
yeah.
been very rare that a bar was dedicated to the LGBT community. Um, and they wouldn't have advertised themselves as such. It would have been word of mouth. And
I remember being at the Copa. And we're downtown Flint. Flint, Michigan has never had a really good reputation. Like there was a lot of crime. At one time it was I don't know if it was the capital, but the automotive industry was huge there. So when that was starting to be phased out, there was a lot of problems in Flint. People lost jobs, things like that. So, but I remember getting in my car and you park on a side street and you literally would get out of the car and look around and make a quick sprint to the front door. And then when it was time, the bouncer, security guy would be outside the door and you look and he says, okay, guys go. And, you know, we literally were like, we're on the main drag. You didn't want somebody to go by and who knows. I
That's
never
smart.
had a problem. But it was, you know, if you leave the bar at 2 a.m., obviously you've had a few cocktails or beers or something, and your inhibitions are a little bit less. You got to be very, very careful. But it was, you know, I don't feel so much now that's the case. Maybe some areas, but not now. So the world has changed a lot, but we made some advances, but we really have gone back with a lot of things.